Welcome to this interview, everyone. I'm Francis Seeley from Global Net 21 and Enfield Voices, and this is one of the interviews that we do regularly that look at the work that people are doing in Enfield, locally, nationally, and globally. And what we're going to do today is look at the Felix Project. Now, we'd said that Paul Blake, who was the depot manager of the Felix Project in Enfield, was going to do this, but unfortunately he couldn't come in today. So instead of Paul, we have got Damien Conrad, who is the Depot Co-ordinator, and we're really pleased that he is here today. If any of you want to write comments, you can see this streamed on Facebook, so please put it in the comments box, ideally on the Enfield Voices site, because we can pick it up more easily, and then we'll put those questions to Damien. Anyhow, Damien, thank you for joining us today. And we're going to talk about the Felix Project. Now, lots of people have heard of the Felix Project. Many people will know what the Felix Project is, but some people won't. So do you want to tell us what is the Felix Project?
Right, so we're a charity who tackle food waste and food poverty. It was a charity that was started a couple of years ago by the parents of a guy called Felix. And Felix, unfortunately, died of a rare strain of meningitis very, very quickly. But in his brief life, he played football and often came across other footballers who were experiencing food poverty, who hadn't eaten before a match. And he was absolutely appalled by this. When he died suddenly, his parents felt they should do something, leave a legacy, do something in his name, and set up the project as a result of this.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because it's an interesting story about Felix and the young 10-year-old lad who tragically died, and the fact that from that tragedy came this incredible project. I mean, did it start up through a sort of football network to begin with?
Yeah, so the Felix's parents set up the first depot and in fact fundraised a lot of that off their own back. And that was in Park Royal over in West London. And it started off with just one volunteer, and a small van. And it was very much like it is now, but smaller in operation. And it was the aim was to target food suppliers who had got waste that they needed to dispose of. And if it was edible, could we intervene, accept that waste and redistribute it to charities. We also started linking with local charities, and then used various platforms to bring in volunteers to fill in the middle bit. So it's constantly a juggling act between three things. It's getting the supply in, the demand out from charities across the piece, and volunteers helping to sort the food and fruit and vegetables, and to distribute that on as drivers and co-drivers.
Okay, well, let's go into how you do it in a minute. But you've now got a depot in Enfield, and there's, as you said, other depots around. What made you decide, and why was it decided that there would be a depot in Enfield?
Right, so our initial depot was, in terms of logistics and strategic position, was sort of on the North Circular, within easy reach, the M25, the M4. The same sort of thought process went into setting up the depot at Enfield. So we decided that we needed to have access to arterial roads, but also needed to be near areas where there was a high proportion of disadvantaged and vulnerable people who needed the food. There was also a high density of food producers and suppliers in this neck of the woods, so it seemed the obvious place.
Okay, so you supply mills, which is what you do, and we'll go through the process in a minute.
Yeah.
But who do you supply them to? How do you find out who they're going to be supplied to?
Right. Well, in fact, the actual supply is the one bit of the equation that we never really have to work that hard, because the demand is enormous. We have a database of pending charities So they tend to be charities or non-profit organisations. But more recently, we've been addressing food poverty in schools and in youth. So addressing sort of the nutritional aspect. So a lack of food or the wrong type of food. But in going back to the charities that we supply, we're up to around 230 charities, and those over 50% are now homelessness charities. And bear in mind, some of these charities will have member groups that cross over more than one sort of demographic. But so over half are homelessness. Another big user group is elderly charities such as Age UK and Enfield. We also address, we're targeting refugees and asylum seekers, mental health charities, and youth charities. Youth charities is growing, particularly holiday clubs that supply food inside and outside school holidays to supplement disadvantaged areas. And then we've got HIV and AIDS charities and addiction charities, and you name it. If there's a vulnerable part of the of society, we will be supplying them with food.
So you work with charities and you
Yes.
work with schools. Now,
Yes.
how do you find those charities and schools? Is that done nationally by your national office, or do you locally have a role in going to find these? And if any school or charity is not involved with you and want to, how would they get in touch?
Right. Our charity is only London-based at the moment. There may be plans afoot that I'm not aware of to grow it beyond that. But if charities can find us via the internet, we're sort of omnipresent on social media. And on our website, there's a contact page where potential charities and schools, holiday clubs, whatever your need, if you're providing a hot meal or you're providing a food bank facility where food is being distributed, then you can access it that way. Or alternative, you can email us. So North London at thefelixproject.org is one way. And then the simple process is we issue a letter of agreement, which gives us all the details about your charity's members and how many people and where you are, etc. And we then add you to a list of pending charities. We're then, in fact, Sam to my left is building up route planning, and we're targeting. We're trying to create a optimized kind of route where we're delivering this food. So and typically on a route we'll have 5, 6 or 7 charities or schools that we deliver to.
Yeah, well, we just saw Sam wave to us. I think it was Sam who made contact with us, or we made contact with him in the first place at the Love Your Doorstep sort of launching of their new website, which was great because he then made contact with you, and this is how this happened.
Right.
Okay, so you create meals out of food. So tell us, first of all, how do you go about collecting and preparing that food? What's the process?
Right, the process is that ourselves at the depot in Enfield and some other more centrally placed members of staff are targeting suppliers. Some of these suppliers are chains like supermarkets like Co-op and Lidl, Marks and Spencers and Sainsbury's, who will allocate us a number of stores. We also are trying to get better economies of scale, so we're trying to target more wholesalers, distributors, farms, and where possible, we'll encourage them to deliver direct to us, which saves us miles and petrol and volunteers. When the food comes in, we have a sizable warehouse with racking for about 70 or 80 pallets on the walls, also on the floor, and we've got a large chiller. As the food comes in, our process is to differentiate between use by and best before dates. Use by will go into one specific area and we'll try to get out as fast as possible and weed out anything that's outside and a danger to health. Best before date, all of our recipient charities and schools agree that they will take food outside best before date, which is a qualitative measure and not it doesn't have any bearing on food health and safety. So we will typically give food that is a best before date approaching imminently or outside best before date. As it comes in, we are simply sorting it into mainly the fruit and vegetable, which has got the highest turnover, and we're trying to identify stuff with a shorter shelf life. And we sort it into pre-mixed crates of, say, 4 or 5 ingredients, 4 or 5 fruits or vegetables that typically be able to be made up into a meal. All of those pre-sorted fruit and vegetables, plus all of the non-perishable items that have been pre-mixed as well, are then ready for the deliveries each day.
Okay, so you go and collect the food from the Sainsbury's and the Lidl's and the Icelands or wherever it is. Who does that collecting? Do you have volunteers or do you have professional truckers that go out?
Yes, so we, the whole of the operation, there's very few members of staff, I think, at the moment. We've got 13 full-time members of staff and about 450 volunteers. It's quite an unusual model. So all of the funding that we get, so for every £1 that we get into the Felix Project, it enables us to distribute £4 worth of free food. All of the operations, so our typical roles that we have for volunteers are driver, co-driver, and warehouse sort of operative. And the drivers, we will train them up if they haven't driven a transit van before. We've got some smaller vans, and the co-drivers will be helping with the lifting and delivery of the crates, but also on the map reading. So we have on the phones a pre-configured map of the route, which gives you all the directions. And the other job for the co-driver while sitting alongside the driver is to call in advance all of the food suppliers and make sure that they've got stuff that's ready and available for us to pick up.
So you have volunteers that go out and collect and you train them, and that's great. The food then comes back to the warehouse and your volunteers sort it. You talked about fresh vegetables and so on. But they then prepare it, cook it into ready meals, because that's a big difference, isn't it?
No, we don't do any cooking ourselves. We are supplying charities and schools that do the cooking themselves. So of the 250 charities and schools that we have, the vast majority are kitchens, community kitchens, soup kitchens, call them what you will, but they are providing free hot food. And probably about 20% are actually food bank operations where they're bags for their members to take away and take home and cook themselves.
Okay, so in a way, if the cooking is done by the charities and the schools, how far in advance do they know what sort of food they're going to get? Because sometimes when you plan a menu, you do it days in advance. Do they just get the food on the day and it's hot pot luck what they put together?
It is potluck. We do try to give them forewarning if we have got a particular glut of a food product. So at the moment, we've got lots of apples that have been gleaned or harvested down in Kent yesterday. We've got lots of squash, just passed me a crop. We went down and collected 10 tons of squash from, what's it called? Pumpkin Moon Farm. There was 20 tons available. We took 10, and unbelievably, we've only got about a ton left. That was 3 weeks ago. So where it was the pumpkins, we were letting them know in advance, and you name it, they have cooked. We've had people doing stuffed pumpkins because the charities will send us back photographs of their amazing, cookery. So we've had stuffed pumpkin recipes and soups and curries and anything you can do with a pumpkin, they've done with it.
Okay.
But in general, going back to the crates and what they get. So a charity will get, or a school will get, about between 8 and 10 crates. Each crate will have an average weight of about, say, 12 kilograms. So we're talking about 120 kilograms of food going on. And of that, probably 10% is non-perishable store-cupboard items. And the vast majority is fresh fruit and veg.
Okay. Yep. So, it's quite interesting that you took 10 tons of squash. We're in the age of squash now, which 10 years ago we wouldn't have been. So, I mean, one confusion people might have, and maybe you want to clear this up, I'm sure it's not a confusion that many people have, but some might. A food bank and what you do is very different, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The food bank will typically collect from the front of a supermarket, and it will be up to the altruism of the public to give food to that food bank. For us, we're working at the back of supermarkets. We're working with wholesalers and other operations to generate a food supply into us, and we actually also supply those food banks. But in the main, our food supply, it's probably about 30% to food banks, but about 70% to kitchens that are being operated for the youth, refugees, homeless, and other types of charitable organisations.
Okay, so it's interesting because it looks like what you're doing is squaring a circle, if you can square a circle, between two things really, waste on one hand and food poverty on the other. And it's that gap in the middle that you're trying to fill, is that right?
That's right, yeah, and we're really the glue that kind of links those food suppliers to those people who need the food the most. We're targeting the most vulnerable sectors of our society. And at the moment, we're distributing about 30 tons of food a week. And that 30 tons is effectively 70,000 meals worth of food a week that we're distributing.
That is an amazing number of meals, and obviously you will need a lot of raw materials from what you describe as waste. What is the scale, in your opinion, because you've been working on this for some time, what is the scale of food waste in this country? I mean, you obviously tapped into that, so you must have some idea about
so it's 1.9 million tons a year in the UK, and I'm trying to remember what the figure is for. I think about a third of it is usable food waste that we could potentially target, and how much we're actually using. Well, as I said, we're doing 30 tons a week. So if you do the maths, what's that? 30 times. Anyway, we're not even touching the sides, and we're not touching the sides in terms of the food waste that is potentially out there. And we're not also touching the sides regarding the people who are struggling. We're talking about 4 million people who are experiencing food poverty, of which 4 million are children in the UK, of which, the United Nations report last week highlighted that we've got 1.5 million people in the UK who are destitute, who are really, really struggling.
Someone's just put a comment up saying that I think it was Age UK complained about the quality of the food being dropped off. What sort of quality assurance do you have?
Right. So we have a team, and we bear in mind that we are dependent on our volunteers and the number of volunteers. If you go back to those quantities of food, we endeavour to never let anything slip through the net. The quality of food, I think, in my time, six months ago, we were delivering only 10% only 10% of our food was fruit and vegetables. Sorry, bear with me, there's people chatting behind. And now 70% of our food is fresh fruit and veg. You will, because the food that we're taking is surplus food. We try our best to root out absolutely everything that's non-edible, not fit for human consumption. We would never ever give out anything that's beyond. We would never give out anything that's beyond a use-by date. We would give out stuff outside of best before date, but there's a public misconception and misunderstanding regarding best before dates. And on some of the time, for instance, yesterday we took in about a ton of grapes. We're weeding through them. It's taking us 10 hours to take out the chaff from the wheat, and we hope to give people stuff that's edible. So I think the quality has gone through the roof. The suppliers we're working with, there's constantly a job in managing the suppliers as well, and trying to make sure that we're not seen as someone who will, they can offload their food waste problem too. They've got to understand that it's a sustainable thing to do, and it's good for the environment. But it's also the fact that we're feeding people, and we constantly go back to the suppliers and say to them, actually feed this. Would you actually eat this? Would you feed it to people you know? It's sad if Age UK are questioning, the quality, but if they want to discuss it with us, we're more than happy. Come down and volunteer for a day. I know we've got member of volunteering force that work on both Age UK and but if you could see our end of the operation, then maybe there'd be a better understanding, and maybe we could work together.
Yeah, I mean, all the feedback I've had from people since we've been doing Enfield Voices is that, what you're doing is incredible. So that's great. But you said you only touched the surface of the waste problem. Is that because the problem is so huge, or is it because some companies will not work cooperatively with organizations like yourself?
I think it's twofold. It's on the one hand, it's only through recent publicity drives like Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall's War on Waste, and it being in the public eye, that it's being condemned now. And you've also got companies who can see that it's actually good for their PR and good for themselves and good for society, that they actually do something with regarding sustainability. In general, where we work with organisations, it works best, in smaller operations or more consolidated operations. I think there is a dilution as word cascades out to a bigger multinational organisation, and of course there is always, you've got to factor in the fact that the work that the suppliers do to actually provide us with food takes them time and effort, because they have to weed out their end. So they've got to decide what is edible and not edible, and that takes time and money, and it's whether they've got the will and the endeavour to do that.
The other side of the equation, of course, to waste is the food poverty. Do you find that the incidence of food poverty is increasing nowadays?
Absolutely. Just this morning before you came on, Francis, I was working on just a little project to map all of the places in London that are supplying food to the homeless. And if you actually go through, we're already supplying 110 charities that deal with homelessness. This map has actually given us about another 180 places that are dealing with food, supplying free food to the homeless that weren't even on our radar. And bear in mind we're mainly operating north of the river. We haven't even targeted South London, where there's significant food poverty, and outside of London as well. I mean, it's a growing problem, and I think it's sort of part and parcel of I think that the figure is now there's 17 million people in the UK who've got less than £100 in their bank accounts, and people are struggling.
So, in a way, you're obviously creating a lifeline for a lot of people. Is there any way, in terms of the impact on poverty and so on, you can measure, or do you measure, your social impact?
Well, our main measures are the number of people that we reach, the number of charities and individuals that charities are supplying with food. So if I just look at the last month, we made 2,600 deliveries. Bear in mind that each one of those deliveries are taking about 100 kilograms of food. So we're talking about, the 30 tons. I did do some analysis way back, and it was looking at the nutritional value of the food that we supply. So it's not only the user groups. We've been working with refugee organisations, where for instance recently, where we've had gluts of food and we could not find it. For instance, for a big consignment of baby food. And in the end, we found a local Hertfordshire, just outside Enfield, a refugee organisation that were going over to supply food to refugees in Lesbos and Chios and in Greece. Our routes out of Enfield, we're driving all the way down to King's Cross. We're supplying Islington and Camden. We're going to Haringey and Enfield, Waltham Forest and Barnet. We're going over to Newham and Tower Hamlets. And the deprivation that we see and the feedback that we get on a daily basis is quite incredible. And bear in mind, each one of these charities, they're feeding 50 people or 100 people. They're doing it once, twice, 3 times a week. We've got the mosque, for instance, down in Edmonton, who are 3 times a week feeding 350 people, of which only 10% of their congregation, we're talking about the wider community. Sam's just passing me. That's our, if you can see that, that's a map of all of the charities. And if we zoom in on that, can you zoom in? That's basically our spread just from the Enfield depot. And basically our sort of cut off from this depot is sort of Camden and straight up from there, west, and to the east flank of Hackney, sort of the A12 to the east. But it's, so there we go. So that's all of our charities that we're supplying.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah, we can see. Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Okay. So, I mean, clearly the work that you do and the work that food banks do provide that lifeline, and they do say something about the sad state of our society at the moment. Now, clearly, you've got a lot of people who want to work with you, volunteers. How easy is it to get to volunteers? And the last question really is, if people want to work with you, want to volunteer, want to get in touch with you and do things with you, how do they do that?
Right, so they can contact us direct at Enfield, but the easiest way is to go onto the felixproject.org website. There's a big volunteer button at the top. They click on that and they would click on the North London link. And it's really, really easy to sign up. You just put in a few bits about yourself, and then we will contact you, give you a call, bring you down for a 10-minute induction, half-hour induction. And then to volunteer for shifts, the greatest thing is the flexibility. You can sign up for as little or as much as you like. Shifts start at a couple of hours a time. And you can go, it could be on a regular basis if you like it that way. You could do just a morning or an afternoon. We're working 5 days a week. We've started to put on a few evening shifts, and we've even got Saturday shifts or just one-off events. And we're looking for a broad range of skills. So whilst we love people to come down who, maybe they don't get the physical exercise, we can give them extra steps for their daily fitness routine, running around the warehouse, weightlifting, crates. We can help them, if they know about their fruit and veg, they want to pre-mix a lovely crate, and some of them look spectacular when they go out the door, these wonderful coloured variety of vegetables, and they're basically providing the ingredients for a meal. If you fancy driving, we're in desperate need of the drivers, co-driving, just getting out there. And the best experience is actually delivering the food to the front line, to the charities who need it most. You get a lot of hugs, loads of love, and some real good feedback.
Okay.
And basically it's an online system. You just click on it and say, yeah, I'd like to do that shift.
Okay, right. Well, thanks for that. And I mean, that sounds really, really interesting. And I'm sure that there are people that be interested and they'll get in touch with you, and we'll put your website up on the social networks as well. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for stepping in at the last minute as well.
That's all right. That's all right.
And you've given a really, really good description of what you do. So I'm sure people will, know a lot more about you and know a lot more about the work that you do as well. So thank you for joining us, Damien.
Thank you for allowing us to share it.
Okay, well, thanks. And we'll end this interview now.